The sun was setting over the Grand Plaza Hotel, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful evening for a wedding, but for one exhausted waitress it was just another long shift in an endless string of them. Lisa had been on her feet for 12 hours straight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and despite her best efforts, wisps of it had escaped throughout the day, framing her tired face. She leaned against the wall of the kitchen, taking a moment to herself before heading back out to the chaos of the reception hall. 2 minutes, that's all you get, called out the head chef, not unkindly. He understood the pressure the waitstaff was under, especially during wedding season. The Grand Plaza was the most sought-after venue in town, which meant back-to-back events and very little downtime. Lisa nodded gratefully and closed her eyes. Just as she was about to push herself off the wall and return to work, the kitchen doors burst open. It was Rick, the floor manager, his face flushed with stress and his clipboard clutched tightly in his hand. "Lisa," he called out, scanning the kitchen until his eyes landed on her. "I need you to take over the head table. Jen just called in sick and we're already short-staffed." A groan escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Rick, I've been here since 6 this morning. I was supposed to be done after the Andersons' lunch reception." Rick's expression softened slightly. I know. But this is the Chapman-Brooks wedding. Very high profile, big spenders. The mother of the bride is," he lowered his voice, "a bit of a handful." That was Rick's code for nightmare client. Lisa had dealt with enough of those to know exactly what he meant. "Double overtime," she bargained, straightening her uniform. Rick hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Deal, but I need you at your best. This could mean a lot of future bookings for us." With a resigned sigh, Lisa followed Rick out of the kitchen and through the service corridor that led to the main reception hall. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses grew louder with each step. Through the small round windows of the service doors, she could see the elegant decoration of the hall. White roses and lilies adorned every table. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over everything, and a live string quartet played softly in the corner. "The bride's mother has very specific ideas about how the champagne service should go," Rick explained as they walked. "She wants the bottles presented to her first for approval, then served to the head table in a specific order, starting with the bride's grandparents, then the bride's parents, the groom's parents, and finally the bride and groom." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "That's not our usual protocol." "I know," Rick sighed. "But she's insisting. She also wants the staff to announce each champagne as it's being served. The year, the vineyard, the whole spiel." Before Lisa could protest, they reached the service station nearest to the head table. Rick handed her a small card with information about the champagne. "Just make it work, please." With that, he was gone, disappearing back into the crowd to handle some other crisis. Lisa took a deep breath, put on her professional smile, and approached the champagne station. The bottles were already on ice, expensive ones, she noticed. This really was a high-profile event. As she prepared the tray with champagne flutes, a woman in a lavender dress approached. She had perfectly coiffed hair and jewelry that probably cost more than Lisa's yearly rent. "You must be the new server," the woman said, eyeing Lisa critically. "I'm Mrs. Chapman, mother of the bride." Lisa's smile didn't waver. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to handle the champagne service for the toast." "Good. Now, I've given specific instructions about how this should be done." Mrs. Chapman launched into an explanation that matched what Rick had told her, but with even more detailed requirements. The glasses needed to be held at a certain angle, the pouring had to be done from a specific height, and there were to be no drips on the tablecloth. "Of course, Mrs. Chapman," Lisa said, maintaining her professional demeanor despite the growing knot in her stomach. These kinds of micromanaged services rarely went well, especially when she was already running on empty. After Mrs. Chapman finally walked away, Lisa quickly checked her watch. The toasts were scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. She needed to start the service now if she wanted to have everyone served in time. With practiced hands, she arranged the flutes on her tray and picked up the first bottle of champagne. It was a vintage that cost more than she made in a week. Taking a steadying breath, she approached the head table, beginning with the bride's grandparents as instructed. "Pardon me," she said politely to the elderly couple. "I'll be serving you the 2008 Cristal Brut from Louis Roederer Champagne House in France." The grandmother smiled kindly at her, but before Lisa could pour, Mrs. Chapman appeared at her side. No, 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 she hissed. You were supposed to show me the bottle first. And you're holding the glasses all wrong. Lisa felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment as guests at nearby tables turned to look. I apologize, Mrs. Chapman. Let me start over. She returned to the champagne station, aware of Mrs. Chapman's eyes following her every move. The bride, a young woman who looked remarkably like her mother except for the kindness in her eyes, shot Lisa an apologetic look from the head table. Taking another bottle, Lisa presented it to Mrs. Chapman with a small bow. The 2008 Cristal Brut, madam. Mrs. Chapman examined the label with narrowed eyes before giving a curt nod. Proceed. This time, Lisa made it through serving the grandparents without interruption. She moved on to the bride's parents, carefully reciting the information about the champagne. But as she was about to pour for Mrs. Chapman, disaster struck. Another server, rushing past with a tray of appetizers, bumped into Lisa. Her hand jerked, and a few drops of champagne splashed onto the pristine tablecloth in front of Mrs. Chapman. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Chapman looked at the small wet spot, as if Lisa had just committed a capital offense. I'm so sorry, Lisa stammered, quickly pulling out a clean napkin to blot the spill. It was an accident. This is unacceptable, Mrs. Chapman said, her voice rising. I gave very specific instructions. This tablecloth is imported French linen. By now, more guests were watching the scene unfold. The bride looked mortified, and the groom was trying to calm his new mother-in-law. Mom, it's just a few drops, the bride said softly. It's not a big deal. But Mrs. Chapman was not to be placated. I'm paying a fortune for this reception, and I expect perfection. Is that too much to ask? Lisa, still holding the champagne bottle, felt something snap inside her. She had been on her feet for over 12 hours, had missed her lunch break, and had agreed to stay late to help out. And now she was being berated over a few drops of champagne on a tablecloth that would be washed anyway. Actually, Mrs. Chapman, she said, setting the bottle down carefully, I think it is too much to ask. The gasps from the nearby guests were audible. Mrs. Chapman's eyes widened in shock. Excuse me? I said, I think it is too much to ask, Lisa repeated, her voice steadier now. Accidents happen. I apologized, and I'm trying to fix it. But treating staff like we're beneath you isn't going to make your daughter's wedding day any happier. The bride's mouth fell open in surprise, but there was a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Mrs. Chapman, however, was not amused. Her face turned an alarming shade of red. How dare you? I want to speak to your manager immediately. As if summoned by the commotion, Rick appeared at Lisa's side. His face was a mask of professional concern, but his eyes darted nervously between Lisa and the furious mother of the bride. Is there a problem here? He asked. Your server, Mrs. Chapman spat the word, has not only ruined my daughter's wedding linen, but has also been incredibly disrespectful. I want her removed from this reception immediately. Rick turned to Lisa, his expression a clear question. What happened? Lisa took a deep breath. She thought about the double overtime, about her rent that was due next week, about the fact that jobs like this weren't easy to come by in this town. But she also thought about her own dignity. Mrs. Chapman is upset because I spilled a few drops of champagne when another server bumped into me, she explained calmly. I apologized and tried to clean it up, but apparently that wasn't good enough. Rick looked at the tablecloth where the small wet spot was already drying. Then he looked at the increasingly uncomfortable wedding guests, the embarrassed bride, and the fuming mother of the bride. Perhaps, he began diplomatically. I refuse to continue serving at this wedding, Lisa interrupted, surprising even herself with her boldness. I've been working for 12 hours straight. I agreed to stay late to help out. I've been nothing but professional despite being treated like I'm somehow less than human, and I'm done. With that, she untied her apron and handed it to a stunned Rick. The reception hall had gone completely silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. The musicians watching the drama unfold with the same fascinated horror as the wedding guests. In that moment of utter stillness, no one could have predicted what would happen next, least of all Lisa herself. A heavy silence hung over the reception hall. Lisa stood there, apron in hand, suddenly very aware of all the eyes on her. Her heart pounded in her chest. What had she done? Had she really just quit in the middle of a high-profile wedding? Rick's face had gone pale. The wedding coordinator, a tall woman named Beth, rushed over, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "What's happening?" Beth whispered urgently to Rick. "Why has the service stopped?" Before Rick could answer, Mrs. Chapman rose from her seat, her napkin falling forgotten to the floor. This person," she said, pointing a manicured finger at Lisa, "has ruined my daughter's wedding." The bride, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, finally stood up as well. "Mom, please," she begged quietly. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Mrs. Chapman's voice rose higher. "This waitress is the one who actually," Lisa interrupted, surprising herself with her continued boldness. "I'm not just a waitress." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. In the back of her mind, a small voice was screaming at her to apologize, to beg for her job back, to do anything but continue this public confrontation. But another part of her, the part that had been silenced for far too long, was finally speaking up. "Before I worked here," Lisa continued, her voice growing steadier with each word, "I studied at the Manhattan School of Music." It was the first time she had mentioned her past to anyone at the Grand Plaza. For 3 years, she had kept that part of her life locked away, too painful to revisit. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Even Mrs. Chapman seemed momentarily thrown off by this unexpected turn in the conversation. "I was a piano performance major," Lisa explained, her eyes now fixed on the beautiful grand piano, sitting unused in the corner of the reception hall. It was there for show, mostly, a Steinway that the hotel had acquired for its elegance rather than its musical purpose. "I had to drop out in my final year because of, well, life." What she didn't say was how her mother had fallen ill, how the medical bills had piled up, how she had chosen family over her dreams. Some stories were still too raw to share. Beth, ever the problem solver, stepped forward. That's very interesting," she said carefully, clearly trying to figure out how this information could possibly help the current situation. "But we still have a wedding reception to run." "And let her play," the voice came from the head table. But it wasn't Mrs. Chapman's, it was the bride's. Everyone turned to look at the young woman in white. She had stood up fully now and was looking directly at Lisa with an expression of curious interest. "What?" Mrs. Chapman sputtered. "Let her play the piano," the bride repeated more firmly this time. "If she studied at the Manhattan School of Music, she must be good." Lisa felt her mouth go dry. It had been years since she had performed in front of anyone. The last time had been at her mother's funeral, a piece so painful to play that she had locked the piano lid afterward and never opened it again. I don't know if I can," Lisa admitted. The bride stepped away from the table and approached her. Up close, Lisa could see the kindness in her eyes, so at odds with her mother's harsh demeanor. "Please," the bride said softly. "Our pianist canceled at the last minute. We were going to use a playlist for the first dance, but it would mean so much to have live music." Mrs. Chapman hurried over. "Abby, this is ridiculous. We can't have a waitress perform at your wedding." "It's my wedding day, Mom," Abby replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "And I want her to play." For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other, engaged in a silent battle of wills. Then, remarkably, Mrs. Chapman's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," she said tersely. "But if she embarrasses us, she won't," Abby insisted, though she had no way of knowing this for certain. She turned back to Lisa. "Will you, please?" Lisa looked from Abby to the piano, then to Rick, who gave her a small, confused nod. "Okay," she finally agreed. "I'll play for your first dance." A relieved smile broke across Abby's face. She turned to her new husband, who had been watching the exchange with a bemused expression. "Tom, we're going to have live music after all." As the couple returned to their seats, buzzing with excitement about this unexpected turn of events, Beth pulled Lisa aside. "Are you sure about this?" she asked in a low voice. "If you can't deliver, I can," Lisa said with more confidence than she felt. "Just give me a few minutes to prepare." Beth nodded, then hurried off to adjust the evening's schedule. Rick approached next, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You never mentioned you were a pianist," he said. Lisa shrugged. "You never asked." Then more softly, "It wasn't something I talked about anymore." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Well," he said, clapping her on the shoulder, "I guess tonight that changes." As the staff rushed to rearrange the schedule, Lisa made her way slowly to the piano. It stood in the corner of the hall, its polished surface reflecting the soft light of the chandeliers. She ran her fingers lightly over the lid, feeling the smooth, cool wood beneath her skin. With a deep breath, she lifted the cover and revealed the keys, pristine ivory and ebony, waiting patiently for someone to bring them to life. Lisa sat down on the bench, adjusting her position out of habit. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. It had been so long. What if she couldn't remember how to play? What if years of serving trays and washing dishes had erased the muscle memory that had once been as natural to her as breathing? A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her. It was Abby. "What song would you like for your first dance?" Lisa asked, trying to sound professional despite her nerves. Abby smiled. "We were going to use Can't Help Falling in Love, do you know it?" Lisa nodded. It was a classic, one she had played countless times during her years of study. "I know it," she confirmed. "Thank you for doing this," Abby said, squeezing Lisa's shoulder before returning to her husband. Beth's voice came over the microphone, announcing that it was time for the bride and groom's first dance. The guests, still buzzing with curiosity about the unexpected change in staff roles, quieted down and turned their attention to the center of the dance floor, where Abby and Tom now stood waiting. Lisa took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, her fingers stiff from disuse, but then, like awakening from a long sleep, something inside her stirred. The music began to flow more naturally, her hands remembering what her mind had tried to forget. As the beautiful melody filled the room, Abby and Tom began their dance, moving gracefully across the floor. The guests watched, enchanted not just by the couple but by the unexpected beauty of the live music. Lisa closed her eyes, letting herself be carried away by the song. Each note felt like coming home, like reuniting with a piece of herself that had been missing for too long. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed that people were watching her just as much as they were watching the dancing couple. Their expressions ranged from surprise to admiration to outright awe. As the song came to an end, there was a moment of silence, and then the room erupted in applause. Abby and Tom were beaming, and even Mrs. Chapman looked grudgingly impressed. "Another one," someone called from the crowd. "Play another." Lisa looked to Abby for guidance, and the bride nodded enthusiastically. So Lisa played again. And again. Songs she hadn't thought about in years came flowing back to her. Classical pieces, popular songs, even old jazz standards that she used to practice late into the night. With each song, the atmosphere in the reception hall transformed. The tension that had hung in the air earlier evaporated, replaced by a warm, joyful energy. Guests who had been sitting stiffly at their assigned tables were now gathering around the piano, requesting songs, swaying to the music, some even dancing. Mrs. Chapman, who had been watching from a distance with her arms crossed, gradually moved closer. By the time Lisa launched into a rousing rendition of Great Balls of Fire, the older woman was tapping her foot along with the beat, her earlier anger seemingly forgotten. During a brief pause between songs, Lisa caught Rick's eye. He was standing by the service doors, watching her with an expression of complete disbelief. She gave him a small, almost apologetic smile. He shook his head in wonder and mouthed, "Where have you been hiding?" The truth was, she had been hiding from herself. From the pain of giving up her dreams, from the fear of never being good enough. But tonight, somehow, those fears seemed distant and unimportant. As she turned back to the piano, ready to start another song, she noticed a man in a tailored suit watching her intently from near the bar. Unlike the other guests, he wasn't smiling or swaying to the music. Instead, he was studying her with a thoughtful, almost calculating gaze. Before she could wonder too much about him, Abby approached the piano again, her face flushed with happiness. "You're amazing," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You've completely transformed our wedding." Lisa felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied. Abby leaned in closer. "The guests are going crazy for you. Would you be willing to play for the rest of the reception? We'll pay you, of course." Lisa looked around at the joyful faces, at the people who were now experiencing her music, rather than just her service. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Not just a waitress, not just someone getting by, but Lisa the pianist, Lisa the musician, Lisa who had once dreamed of playing on the world's greatest stages. Yes, she said, her heart full. I'd love to. As she began to play again, Lisa had no way of knowing that the man at the bar was still watching her, or that he was about to approach her with an offer that would change everything. All she knew was that in this moment, she had found her way back to the music and it felt like finally coming home. The wedding reception was in full swing. Lisa's fingers danced across the piano keys as if they had never stopped. The melody of Tiny Dancer filled the grand hall, and couples swayed on the dance floor, lost in the music and the moment. Lisa had lost track of time. What had started as one song for the first dance had turned into a 2-hour musical journey. She had played everything from classical pieces to pop hits, taking requests from guests who now treated her with a respect that was worlds away from how they had viewed her as a server just hours before. Between songs, guests would approach her with drink offers and compliments. One elderly gentleman had tears in his eyes as he thanked her for playing a Chopin nocturne that reminded him of his late wife. A group of bridesmaids had gathered around the piano, singing along to a Taylor Swift medley that Lisa had improvised. Even Mrs. Chapman, who had been so quick to dismiss her earlier, had approached the piano during a short break. The older woman had stood awkwardly for a moment before simply saying, "You play beautifully," and walking away. Coming from her, it felt like high praise indeed. As Lisa finished Tiny Dancer, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. She smiled and flexed her fingers, which were beginning to feel the strain of playing for so long after years of dormancy. Just as she was about to start another song, she felt a presence beside her. It was the man in the tailored suit she had noticed watching her earlier. Up close, she could see that he was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He held out a glass of water, which she accepted gratefully. "Thank you," she said, taking a sip. The cool water was heaven on her parched throat. "No, thank you," the man replied, his voice carrying a hint of a British accent. "That was Elton John meets classical pianist, and somehow it worked brilliantly." Lisa laughed. "I like to add my own touch." The man nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I'm David, by the way. David Winters." "Lisa," she replied, setting the water down on a napkin atop the piano. "Though I guess you probably gathered that from the earlier drama." A small smile played at the corner of David's mouth. "Yes, quite the career transition you made tonight. From waitress to pianist in one dramatic moment." There was something about the way he said it that made Lisa curious. Most guests had treated her performance as a charming wedding surprise, but David seemed to be assessing her with a more professional eye. "Are you a friend of the bride or groom?" she asked. "Neither, actually," he admitted. "I'm here with my wife, who is a cousin of the bride's father. Family obligation and all that." He gestured vaguely toward the dance floor where an elegant woman in a blue dress was chatting with some other guests. "Ah," Lisa nodded. That explained why she hadn't seen him at the head table. "But I'm glad I came," David continued. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, offering it to her. "I don't normally do this at family functions, but I'd be remiss if I didn't." Lisa took the card and read it. Her eyes widened slightly. "David Winters, executive producer, Harmony Records. You're a record producer?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. David nodded. "Primarily classical and jazz, though we've been branching out into what I call crossover artists, musicians who can bridge different genres." Lisa looked down at the card again, then back up at David. Was this really happening? Part of her wondered if this was some elaborate prank. "I've been in this business for 25 years, David said, as if reading her thoughts. "I've worked with artists who sold out Carnegie Hall and others who should have but never got the chance. And in all that time, I've learned to recognize something special when I hear it." He gestured toward the piano. "You have it. That indefinable quality that makes people stop and listen." Lisa felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. Thank you, but I haven't played seriously in years." "And yet here you are holding an entire wedding reception captive," David pointed out. "Imagine what you could do with some practice and the right opportunities." Before Lisa could respond, Abby appeared at her side, slightly breathless and radiant with happiness. "Lisa, you're amazing." The bride gushed. "Everyone's talking about you. Mrs. Peterson, she's the one in the purple dress by the dessert table. She wants to know if you're available to play at her daughter's Sweet 16 next month." Lisa blinked in surprise. "Oh, and my cousin Nancy is getting married in June, and she just fired her wedding band because they were being difficult about the playlist, and she wants your contact information." It was all happening so fast. Just hours ago, Lisa had been an exhausted waitress at the end of her rope. Now she was fielding performance requests and talking to a record producer. David smiled at Abby. "Your wedding pianist is causing quite a stir." Abby beamed. "I know, best wedding crisis ever, right?" She turned back to Lisa. "Take a break if you need to, but please don't leave without playing a few more songs. The night is still young." As Abby hurried back to her groom, Lisa turned to David. "This is surreal," she admitted. "It's opportunity," he corrected her. "The question is, what will you do with it?" That question hung in the air between them, full of possibility. Before she could answer, Beth, the wedding coordinator, approached with a plate of food. "You must be starving," Beth said, setting the plate on a small table near the piano.
"I figured you deserve dinner that you don't have to serve yourself for once." Lisa smiled gratefully.
"Thanks, Beth." "No, thank you," Beth replied earnestly. "You saved this reception. Mrs. Chapman actually smiled at me earlier. I didn't know her face could do that." They all laughed, and Beth hurried off to handle some other aspect of the event. "Eat," David encouraged. "We can talk more later." As he walked back to join his wife, Lisa took a moment to process everything that had happened. She looked down at the business card still in her hand, half expecting it to disappear like some Cinderella at midnight illusion, but it remained solid and real, as did the piano in front of her and the newfound respect in the eyes of everyone around her. She tucked the card carefully into her pocket and turned to her food, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. As she ate, she watched the reception, the dancing, the laughter, the joy. For the first time, she wasn't on the outside looking in. Not really part of the celebration, but required to facilitate it. Tonight, she was a central part of the magic. By the time she returned to the piano, a small crowd had gathered waiting for her to continue. Among them was Rick, her floor manager, who had been conspicuously absent since her transformation from server to pianist. "Hey," he said awkwardly as she took her seat at the piano bench. "Hey," she replied, straightening her sheet music, though she hardly needed it anymore. "So, you're good," Rick said, stating the obvious. "Like really good." Lisa smiled. "Thanks." He shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, about earlier." "I didn't know." "It's okay," Lisa interrupted. "You couldn't have known." Rick nodded, relieved. "So what happens now? I mean, are you coming back to work tomorrow? Because technically you quit, but I didn't process any paperwork yet, so..." It was a good question. What did happen now? Did she go back to serving tables tomorrow as if nothing had changed? Did she pursue whatever opportunity David Winters was hinting at? Or was there some middle path? "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "But I think things are going to be different." Rick seemed to understand the weight of her words. He nodded slowly. "Well, whatever you decide, you've got talent. Lisa, don't waste it serving champagne to people like Mrs. Chapman." With that surprisingly insightful piece of advice, he walked away, leaving her to her music and her thoughts. As the night went on, Lisa played with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. Each song was better than the last as her confidence grew, and her fingers remembered their old strength and agility. She took more risks, added more flourishes, let more of her personality shine through the music. The guests responded enthusiastically, and by the time she played a rousing finale for the bride and groom's departure, everyone was on their feet, clapping and cheering. After the newlyweds had left in a shower of rose petals and well wishes, Lisa began to gather her things. Most of the guests were leaving as well, though some lingered, savoring the last moments of the celebration. David approached her again, this time with his wife, who complimented Lisa on her playing. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" David asked after his wife had moved on to say her goodbyes to some relatives. Lisa took a deep breath. "I have, but I still have questions." "What exactly are you proposing?" David's eyes lit up, recognizing her interest. "I'd like you to come to my studio next week. Play for some of my colleagues. If they're as impressed as I am, and they will be, we can discuss a development deal." "Development deal," Lisa repeated, the words foreign on her tongue. "Think of it as an opportunity to see what might be possible," David explained. "No pressure, no contracts yet. Just exploration." Lisa thought about her tiny apartment with its secondhand furniture, about the double shifts and the aching feet, about the dreams she had put aside years ago. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll come to your studio." David smiled, a genuine, excited smile that made him look years younger. Wonderful. Let's exchange contact information, and I'll have my assistant set everything up. As they worked out the details, Lisa couldn't help but feel like she was standing on the edge of something new and terrifying and thrilling all at once. The path ahead was unclear, full of unknowns and possibilities. One thing was certain, though. When she had handed Rick her apron earlier that night, she had thought she was giving up. Instead, she had just opened the door to giving more, of her talent, of her passion, of herself, than she had in years. As she left the Grand Plaza that night, piano melodies still echoing in her mind, Lisa knew that whatever happened next, she wouldn't go back to being invisible. She had been seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time since she had set aside her music. And now that the world had heard her play, she wasn't sure she could stay silent anymore. The Harmony Records building stood tall and gleaming in the morning sunlight. Lisa checked the address on her phone one more time, though she'd memorized it days ago. This was it. The glass doors loomed before her, both inviting and intimidating. A week had passed since the wedding, a week that had turned her life upside down. She had gone back to work at the Grand Plaza the next day, but everything had changed. Co-workers who had barely acknowledged her before now asked about her musical background. Guests who recognized her from the Chapman Brooks wedding requested her by name, some even leaving generous tips just for her to stop by their table and chat about music. Rick had called her into his office on the third day. She'd expected to be formally fired for her outburst, but instead, he'd offered her a different position. House pianist for the hotel's upscale restaurant 4 nights a week. The pay is better, and the hours are more reasonable, he'd explained. Plus, no more carrying trays or dealing with customers like Mrs. Chapman. It was a generous offer, one that would have seemed like a dream job just a week ago. Lisa had asked for time to think about it, and Rick had understood. Take all the time you need, he'd said. Just know that the position is yours if you want it. Now, standing outside Harmony Records, Lisa wondered if she was being foolish. The restaurant gig was a sure thing. Steady pay, familiar surroundings. What David was offering was nebulous, a development deal that might lead to something or might lead nowhere. You gonna stand out there all day, or are you coming in? Lisa looked up to see David holding one of the glass doors open, an amused smile on his face. I was just having second thoughts. He nodded understandingly. That's normal. But you're here now, so you might as well come in and see what we're about. Taking a deep breath, Lisa followed him into the building. The lobby was modern and stylish, with platinum records adorning the walls and comfortable seating areas where people sat with coffees and tablets, engaged in quiet conversation. David led her to an elevator and pressed the button for the 5th floor. Our studios are upstairs, he explained.
State-of-the-art equipment, excellent sound engineers.
And more importantly, a beautiful Steinway that's just begging to be played by someone who'll do it justice. The elevator doors opened onto a hallway with framed photographs of musicians. Some Lisa recognized, some she didn't. David pointed out a few as they walked. That's Melody Chen. We signed her 3 years ago when she was playing in subway stations. Now she sells out concert halls across Asia. He gestured to another photo. And that's the River Quartet. They blend classical with folk traditions from around the world. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Lisa tried not to feel intimidated by the success stories surrounding her. These were real musicians, professionals with training and experience, not waitresses who happened to know how to play piano. As if reading her thoughts, David stopped walking and turned to her. You know why I approached you at that wedding? Lisa shrugged. Because I was the entertainment that didn't cost you anything? David chuckled. No, it was because when you played, every person in that room felt something. That's rare, Lisa. Technique can be taught. Theory can be learned. But making people feel something, that's a gift. Before she could respond, he pushed open a door labeled Studio C. Inside was a spacious room with sound-dampening panels on the walls, various instruments in stands, and in the center, a gleaming black grand piano. This is where the magic happens, David said, gesturing around the room. Our recording studio. Lisa approached the piano reverently, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface. It was far nicer than the one at the Grand Plaza, which was saying something. Go ahead, David encouraged. It's not just for show. Sitting down on the bench, Lisa positioned her hands over the keys. The piano responded to her touch beautifully. the notes ringing clear and true through the acoustically designed space. She played a few scales to warm up, then transitioned into a piece she'd been practicing at home on her old keyboard, a Debussy prelude that had always been one of her favorites. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice when other people entered the studio. Only when she finished the piece and heard applause did she look up, startled to see that David had been joined by 3 others, 2 men and a woman, all watching her with interest. "Everyone, this is Lisa," David introduced. "Lisa, these are some of my colleagues. Rose is our A&R director, Paul handles marketing, and Greg is one of our best sound engineers." Lisa stood and shook hands with each of them, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "That was lovely," Rose said. She was a stylish woman in her 40s with curly hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Debussy's the girl with the flaxen hair, right?" Lisa nodded, impressed. "Yes, it's one of my favorites. David says you haven't had formal training in years," Paul remarked. He was younger than the others, with trendy glasses and a casual but expensive-looking outfit. "Is that true? I studied at Manhattan School of Music for 3 years, Lisa explained. "But I had to drop out before finishing my degree. Family emergency," David added, giving the others a look that said not to press for details. Greg, the sound engineer, a quiet man with kind eyes, spoke up. "David mentioned you can cross genres. Can you show us something more contemporary?" Lisa thought for a moment, then nodded and returned to the piano. This time, she played a jazzed-up version of a popular song that had been topping the charts recently, infusing it with classical flourishes and improvisational sections that made it uniquely her own. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat, then Paul whistled low. "Okay, I get it now," he said to David. "She's got that thing you're always going on about." "Told you," David replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. Rose approached the piano. "Lisa, would you be willing to play a few more pieces for us? We'd like to record them, just to get a sense of your range." And so the audition began in earnest. For the next hour, Lisa played everything they asked for. Classical standards, jazz improvisations, pop covers with classical twists. Greg recorded it all, occasionally adjusting microphones or asking her to replay sections. As she played, Lisa felt something shifting inside her. The nervous energy that had filled her earlier was giving way to excitement, to possibility. This studio, with its perfect acoustics and responsive piano, felt right in a way that few places ever had. Finally, after a particularly challenging piece that Rose had requested, David called for a break. "Let's give Lisa's fingers a rest," he said. "And maybe some refreshments?" While Paul went to fetch drinks, the others gathered in a small seating area in the corner of the studio. Lisa flexed her fingers, surprised to find that they weren't as tired as they should have been after playing for so long. It was as if her body remembered this, welcomed it, had been waiting for the chance to do what it was meant to do. "So," David said when they were all settled with their drinks, "what do you think, Lisa, about all this?" She searched for the right words. "It's intimidating, exciting, overwhelming," Rose smiled. "That's how it should feel. If it didn't scare you a little, it wouldn't be worth doing." "The question is," Paul added, "are you ready to take a chance on this? Because we are." Lisa looked at each of them in turn. "What exactly are you offering?" David leaned forward. "A 6-month development deal. We provide studio time, coaching if you want it, access to our network of musicians and industry professionals. You work with us to develop your sound, record some demos, maybe collaborate with some of our other artists. And after 6 months?" Lisa asked. "We evaluate where we are," Rose explained. "If things are going well, and based on what we heard today, I think they will be, we talk about a proper recording contract." Greg, who had been quiet for most of the conversation, spoke up. "It's a good deal, especially for someone who's been out of the game for a while. No pressure to produce hits right away, just time to find your voice again." Lisa took a sip of her water, letting it all sink in. "What about my job? I can't just quit and have no income for 6 months. We offer a stipend during development," David assured her. "It's not a fortune, but it's enough to cover basic expenses. And nothing would stop you from playing gigs on the side. In fact, we'd encourage it." Lisa thought about Rick's offer at the hotel. 4 nights a week playing for diners would be stable, safe. This development deal was riskier, but the potential rewards were so much greater. "Can I ask one more thing?" she said. When David nodded, she continued, "Why me?" You must have people with better training, more recent experience, more connections lining up to work with you. David exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. Because when I saw you play at that wedding, I didn't see a waitress who could play piano. I saw a pianist who had been serving tables, and those are very different things. Rose nodded in agreement. This industry is full of technically perfect musicians who never connect with an audience. What you did, turning a potentially disastrous wedding into something magical, making everyone in that room feel something, that can't be taught. So, David said, extending his hand across the coffee table between them. Are you in? Lisa looked at his outstretched hand, thinking about all the turns her life had taken to bring her to this moment. The years of practice as a child, the joy of getting into music school, the heartbreak of having to leave, the exhaustion of double shifts at the hotel, the indignity of Mrs. Chapman's treatment, the exhilaration of playing again, and now, a chance to see where her music might take her. She reached out and shook David's hand. I'm in. The smile that broke across his face was genuine and excited. Excellent. Let's get the paperwork started. As they began discussing logistics and schedules, Lisa felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She had no idea where this path might lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was eager to find out. The piano across the room seemed to gleam a little brighter in the studio lights, as if it too was excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. Lisa caught its reflection in the glass wall and smiled. Sometimes the worst moments in life, like refusing to serve champagne at a high-profile wedding, led to the best beginnings. The concert hall buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, and latecomers stood in the back, craning their necks to see the stage. The grand piano sat waiting in the spotlight, its polished surface gleaming. Backstage, Lisa paced nervously, smoothing down her elegant black dress for the 100th time. 6 months had flown by since she'd signed the development deal with Harmony Records. 6 months of the most intense musical growth she'd experienced since her early days at music school. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, David joked, appearing at her side with 2 bottles of water. He handed her one, which she accepted gratefully. I can't help it, she admitted after taking a long drink. There are over 500 people out there, all of whom are excited to hear you play, David reminded her. Including some very special guests. Lisa nodded, knowing exactly who he meant. In the front row, reserved seats were waiting for Rick and some of her former co-workers from the Grand Plaza, who had supported her journey every step of the way. Next to them would be Abby and Tom, the newlyweds whose wedding had changed everything. And most surprisingly, Mrs. Chapman had requested a ticket after hearing about the concert through her daughter. The journey to this moment had been intense, filled with long days in the studio, late nights composing, and countless hours practicing until her fingers ached. The development deal had given her the freedom to fully immerse herself in music again, to rediscover old passions and explore new directions. David and his team had been there every step of the way. Rose had connected her with vocal coaches to help with the few pieces where Lisa sang. Greg had patiently recorded and re-recorded tracks until they captured exactly the sound she wanted. Paul had built a social media presence for her that had quickly gained a following, especially after he posted a video of her playing a haunting arrangement of a popular song. The video had gone viral, racking up millions of views and generating buzz that extended far beyond what any of them had expected. But tonight was the real test. Her first solo concert, a showcase of original compositions and unique arrangements that would determine whether Harmony Records would offer her that full recording contract. 5 minutes, called the stage manager, poking his head into the green room. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. You know, David said quietly, when I first saw you play at that wedding, you looked terrified for about 10 seconds, and then something shifted and it was like watching someone come home. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen anyone transform quite like that. Lisa smiled at the memory. I was terrified. But then, it was like all the noise in my head went quiet and there was just the music. Find that place again, David advised. The rest will take care of itself. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. The stage manager was back. It's time. With one last reassuring squeeze of her shoulder, David left to take his seat in the audience. Lisa stood alone for a moment, gathering herself. On a small table nearby sat a framed photograph of her mother, smiling proudly after one of Lisa's student recitals many years ago. "This one's for you, Mom," she whispered. Then with her head held high, she walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was warm and enthusiastic. Lisa could make out familiar faces in the front row, Rick giving her a thumbs up, Abby and Tom beaming at her, and yes, even Mrs. Chapman, looking slightly uncomfortable but present nonetheless. Lisa took her seat at the piano, adjusted her position, and placed her hands above the keys. The hall fell silent, 500 people holding their breath, waiting. In that moment of perfect quiet, Lisa found it again. That stillness, that sense of rightness, that feeling of coming home. She began to play. The first piece was one of her originals, a composition that told the story of her journey. From the frantic, discordant notes representing her life as an overworked waitress to the soaring, joyful melody of rediscovery. As her fingers moved across the keys, she poured everything into the music. All the struggle, all the doubt, all the hope. When the final notes faded away, there was a beat of silence, and then the audience erupted in applause. Lisa looked up, surprised by the intensity of their response. And just like that, any remaining nervousness evaporated. She was exactly where she was meant to be. For the next hour, she took the audience on a musical journey. She played classical pieces with contemporary twists, jazz standards reimagined through a classical lens, and original compositions that defied easy categorization. For 2 special numbers, she even sang, her voice clear and emotive, adding another dimension to her performance. Between pieces, she shared brief stories about her training, about the years away from music, about the fateful wedding night. The audience laughed when she described Mrs. Chapman's initial reaction to her champagne spill, and she noticed even Mrs. Chapman herself cracked a smile. Sometimes, Lisa told the rapt audience, the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best beginnings. 6 months ago, I was a waitress who had given up on her dreams. Today, she gestured around the concert hall, emotion catching in her throat. The applause that followed was deafening. For her final piece, Lisa had planned something special. "This song is dedicated to everyone who has ever felt like they've lost their way," she announced. "And it's called Coming Home." The piece began softly, hesitantly, like someone taking their first steps on an unfamiliar path. Gradually, it built in confidence and complexity, incorporating elements of all the styles she had played throughout the evening. By the time it reached its triumphant conclusion, many in the audience had tears in their eyes. Lisa herself felt a tear slide down her cheek as she played the final chords. When she lifted her hands from the keys, the audience rose to their feet as one, the applause thunderous and unending. She stood, bowing deeply, overwhelmed by the response. Flowers were brought onto the stage, roses from David and the harmony team, sunflowers from Abby and Tom, an elegant arrangement from her former co-workers at the Grand Plaza. As the applause continued, David made his way onto the stage, a broad smile on his face. He hugged her briefly, then stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to announce that Harmony Records has signed Lisa to a 3-album recording contract." The cheers grew even louder. Lisa covered her mouth with her hands, though she had known this was coming. David had told her the night before that the contract was a sure thing, regardless of how the concert went. But having it announced here in front of this audience made it real in a way that nothing else could have. As the evening wound down and people began to file out of the concert hall, a small group gathered at the edge of the stage. Rick was there with Beth and some of the other hotel staff. Abby and Tom waited nearby, hand in hand and beaming with pride as if they were somehow responsible for her success, which, in a way, they were. And there, looking somewhat out of place but determined nonetheless, stood Mrs. Chapman. Lisa approached the older woman with curiosity. They hadn't spoken since the wedding night. "Mrs. Chapman," she greeted her politely. "Thank you for coming tonight." The woman straightened her designer jacket, clearly uncomfortable but pushing through it. "I wanted to see for myself," she said. "Abby kept talking about you, about how talented you were. I thought she was exaggerating." Lisa waited, unsure where this was going. "She wasn't," Mrs. Chapman concluded simply. Then with obvious effort she added, "I may have been harsh at the wedding. It seems I misjudged you." Coming from her, it was practically an effusive apology. Lisa smiled. "Well, in a way, I should thank you. If you hadn't been so demanding about the champagne service, I might never have reached my breaking point. And if I hadn't reached my breaking point, I might never have played that night. Mrs. Chapman considered this, then nodded slowly. Nevertheless, I behaved poorly. I'm sorry. The words seemed to cost her dearly, but they were sincere. Apology accepted, Lisa said warmly. As Mrs. Chapman moved away to join her daughter, David appeared at Lisa's side. Quite a night, huh? He said, surveying the lingering crowd of well-wishers. Quite a 6 months, Lisa corrected him, thinking of everything that had led to this moment. David grinned, and it's just the beginning. Wait till you see what the next year brings. Later that night, after the celebration dinner with friends and colleagues, after the congratulations and the champagne toasts, served without any spills, Lisa returned to her apartment alone. It was a new place, nicer than her old one, though still modest. The most important feature was the baby grand piano that took up much of the living room, a gift from David and the Harmony team when she'd signed the development deal. She sat down at the piano, not to play this time, but just to feel the smooth keys beneath her fingertips. On the music stand rested a framed news clipping, a review of a wedding she'd worked 6 months ago, with a small mention of the surprisingly talented waitress who had stepped in to play piano when the reception hit a rough patch. Lisa smiled at how far she had come since then. From an exhausted server at the end of her rope, to a musician with a recording contract and a sold-out debut concert, all because she had refused to serve champagne at a wedding. Sometimes life's most significant turning points came disguised as its worst moments. Sometimes finding your way forward meant having the courage to say no to what was wrong, so you could eventually say yes to what was right. As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Lisa began to play again softly just for herself. The melody was new, unwritten, the first notes of whatever came next. And whatever that was, she was ready,